The hand gesture my dad taught us as kids helped my sister signal she was being kidnapped. I was on a video call with my sister Harmony when she brushed her hair behind her ear using a specific motion that made my blood run cold. My name is Piper Vaughn, and I'd just watched my 26-year-old sister make the danger signal our father had taught us when I was 8 and she was 5. The gesture looked casual, natural, something anyone else would interpret as tucking hair back. But Harmony had touched her left ear with her right hand crossed over her face, then immediately touched her throat with 2 fingers. That exact sequence meant one thing in our family. I'm in immediate danger and can't speak freely. Dad had been a security consultant who'd worked with corporate executives traveling to high-risk countries, and he'd taught us a system of hand signals that could communicate distress in situations where verbal communication would alert captors or abusers. The ear-throat combination was the most serious signal in our repertoire, reserved for life-threatening situations where rescue was needed immediately. Harmony was supposed to be calling from her hotel room in Seattle where she was attending a pharmaceutical sales conference, but something about the background behind her looked wrong. The walls were bare concrete instead of hotel wallpaper, and I could see industrial shelving in the corner rather than the typical hotel furniture. Her smile was too bright, her voice too cheerful as she told me about her day, and her eyes kept darting to something off-camera that I couldn't see. I kept my own expression neutral and played along with her conversation, asking questions about the conference while my mind raced through protocols. Dad had drilled us constantly on this system from childhood until his death from cancer when I was 16 and Harmony was 13. We'd practiced in grocery stores, at restaurants, during family gatherings, making the signals part of our muscle memory until we could execute them unconsciously. The rule was simple. If you see the danger signal, you act normally. You don't alert whoever is watching that you've recognized the signal, and you start the response protocol immediately once the call or interaction ends. Harmony kept talking about pharmaceutical product launches and networking events, but she made the gesture twice more during our 15-minute call. Each time she adjusted her hair or touched her face, she completed that specific sequence, right hand to left ear, 2 fingers to throat. By the 3rd repetition, I was certain this wasn't accidental or a nervous habit. She was screaming for help in the only way she could while whoever held her watched her maintain a performance of normalcy. I asked her which hotel she was staying at and she named the Fairmont Olympic, a detail I immediately knew was false because she'd told me 2 days ago she was at the Westin. She was giving me wrong information deliberately, confirming that everything about this call was staged for an audience she couldn't acknowledge. When we ended the call, I immediately tried calling her cell phone back. It rang twice, then went to a generic voicemail message that didn't match Harmony's usual greeting. I called 3 more times with the same result, then texted her asking if she wanted to grab dinner tomorrow when she got back. The message showed as delivered but not read, even though Harmony was obsessive about checking her phone constantly. I pulled up her location sharing on my phone and saw that her last known location had been near Seattle-Tacoma International Airport 2 days ago, but the tracking had been disabled since then. Normal Harmony would never disable location sharing because she used it constantly to coordinate with friends and family. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and phone, trying to control the panic rising in my chest while I thought through what to do next. The obvious answer was to call the police, but I could already hear how it would sound. My sister made a hand gesture on a video call and I think she's in danger. They'd tell me to wait 24 hours, that adults are allowed to disable their location tracking, that she was probably just busy at her conference. I needed more information before I could convince law enforcement to take this seriously, and I needed to move fast because every minute that passed increased the danger Harmony was in. I called my brother Tristan, who was 29 and worked as a criminal defense attorney in Portland. He answered on the second ring and his voice shifted from casual to focused the moment I said Harmony had made the danger signal. "Tell me everything," he said, and I walked him through the entire call, describing the wrong hotel name, the concrete walls, the industrial shelving, the disabled location tracking. Tristan was quiet for a moment, then said, "This sounds like a trafficking situation. Sex trafficking or labor trafficking, possibly both. The video call setup is classic control behavior. They let the victim make calls to family to prove they're okay, reduce the urgency of any potential missing person reports, but they control the environment and monitor everything that's said." His voice was tight with the same fear I was feeling, but his legal training kept him analytical. He told me to screen record our entire text conversation history with Harmony going back several weeks, to document everything unusual about the video call, to pull her credit card and bank statements if I had access. He said he'd start making calls to law enforcement contacts and to a private investigator he knew who specialized in missing persons cases. We agreed to meet at his apartment in an hour with everything we could gather, and I heard him already dialing another number as we hung up. I spent the next hour pulling together every piece of information I could find about Harmony's recent activities. Her social media showed normal posts up until 3 days ago when she'd posted a photo at the airport with the caption, "Seattle, here I come." The photo's location tag was accurate, and several friends had commented wishing her luck at the conference. But there had been nothing posted since then, which was unusual for Harmony, who typically shared multiple stories per day when traveling. I logged into the shared family account where we kept emergency contact information and pulled Harmony's credit card statements showing she'd made purchases at SeaTac Airport and then 2 transactions at convenience stores near the Westin Hotel. Then nothing for the past 48 hours. No hotel charges, no restaurant purchases, no typical conference expenses. I took screenshots of everything, noting the timestamps and locations. I also found the conference website and confirmed that Harmony was registered for the event, which was a legitimate pharmaceutical industry gathering with several hundred attendees. I called the Westin directly and asked to be connected to Harmony Vaughn's room. The front desk agent told me politely that they had no guest by that name currently checked in. I tried the Fairmont Olympic next and got the same response. Neither hotel had any record of my sister. Tristan's apartment in the Pearl District was a modern loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. When I arrived, he already had his laptop open with a video call connected to someone I didn't recognize. He introduced the man as Devin Castellanos, a private investigator who specialized in human trafficking cases and who'd worked with Tristan on several criminal defense cases involving exploitation victims. Devin was probably in his early 40s, with sharp eyes and an ex-military bearing evident even through the video screen. He listened without interrupting as I described the danger signal and walked through everything I'd documented. When I finished, he asked me to replay the video call if I'd recorded it. I hadn't, but I'd taken a screenshot during the call that showed Harmony mid-gesture with her right hand crossing to her left ear. Devin studied it for several seconds, then asked about the background visible in the frame. I described the concrete walls and industrial shelving, and he immediately started typing notes. That matches profiles of holding facilities used by trafficking networks operating in the Pacific Northwest, he said. They typically use warehouses or industrial spaces where screaming won't attract attention and where victims can be moved quickly if needed. Devin explained that Seattle had become a major hub for human trafficking operations because of its international airport connections and proximity to Canada, making it easy to move victims across borders. Most operations targeted vulnerable populations like undocumented immigrants or homeless youth, but there was a growing trend of opportunistic kidnappings of professional women attending conferences or traveling alone for business. The traffickers would identify targets at airports or hotels, follow them to determine their patterns, and grab them during brief windows of vulnerability. If your sister was taken from or near her hotel, they've had her for approximately 48 hours, Devin said. That's the critical window where victims are still in initial holding facilities before being moved into the broader trafficking network. After 72 hours, the chances of recovery drop significantly because they get transported to secondary locations that are much harder to identify. He asked if Harmony had any distinguishing marks, tattoos, jewelry that might help identify her. I told him about the small butterfly tattoo on her right ankle and the delicate gold necklace with our mother's birthstone that Harmony never removed. Devin made notes and said he'd start running searches through his network of contacts who monitored trafficking activity. Tristan had been on his phone the entire time making calls, and when he hung up from his third conversation, he told us he'd reached out to a detective he knew in Seattle PD's Vice Unit who handled trafficking cases. Detective Alicia Fonseca had agreed to meet with us if we could get to Seattle tonight, but she'd warned Tristan that without concrete evidence of a crime, there wasn't much official action she could take. She said the video call and the hand gesture won't be enough for a warrant or major resource allocation, but she's willing to hear us out off the record, Tristan explained. She also said if this is trafficking, time is critical. We need to be on the next flight to Seattle. I checked flight times on my phone and found a departure in 3 hours that would get us to SeaTac by 11 p.m. Tristan booked 3 tickets while Devin said he'd drive up from his office in Sacramento, meeting us at Seattle PD headquarters in the morning. I went home and threw essentials into an overnight bag, my hands shaking as I packed. I kept replaying that video call in my head, analyzing every detail of Harmony's expression and body language, torturing myself with questions about what had happened to her and whether she was hurt. The danger signal had been clear and deliberate, which meant she'd been conscious and aware enough to remember our childhood training. That was something. It meant she was still fighting, still trying to help us find her. The flight to Seattle was turbulent, or maybe that was just my perception, as anxiety made every small bump feel catastrophic. Tristan sat beside me with his laptop open, researching case law about human trafficking and victim recovery while I stared at my phone, willing Harmony to text or call. Nothing came through except a notification that her phone had been powered off or destroyed because her number no longer showed active in the Family Locator app. Tristan reached over and squeezed my hand without looking up from his screen, a gesture of solidarity that made tears burn behind my eyes. We'd always been close as siblings, the 3 of us forming a tight unit after Mom died when I was 12. Dad had raised us alone, channeling his security expertise into preparing us for every possible danger, maybe overcompensating for the loss of Mom to cancer that he couldn't prevent or control. The hand signal system had been his way of giving us tools to protect ourselves when he couldn't be there. He'd made us practice until it was instinctive, drilling scenarios where one of us would be in danger and need to signal the others without alerting an attacker. It had seemed paranoid at the time, excessive preparation for situations that would never happen. Now I was grateful beyond words that he'd been so insistent, because that gesture was the only reason we knew Harmony was in trouble instead of assuming she was fine at her conference. We landed at SeaTac at 11:15 p.m. and took a rideshare directly to a hotel near Seattle PD headquarters where Tristan had booked rooms. Neither of us could sleep, so we sat in the hotel restaurant that stayed open late and went through everything again, making lists of questions for Detective Fonseca, identifying gaps in our information, strategizing approaches. Tristan's legal mind was invaluable, helping me channel panic into productive action, framing our evidence in ways that would be most persuasive to law enforcement. Around 2 a.m., Devin called to say he'd arrived in Seattle and was already driving around industrial areas near the Westin Hotel, looking for warehouses or facilities that matched the background visible in Harmony's video call. He said he'd identified 12 potential locations based on the concrete walls and commercial shelving I'd described, and he was photographing each one to document their characteristics. He'd send us a compiled report in the morning that we could present to Detective Fonseca as starting points for investigation. I finally went to my room around 3 a.m. and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Harmony alone somewhere terrified, wondering if she knew we'd recognized her signal and were coming for her. I hoped she did. I hoped she was holding on to that knowledge as motivation to survive whatever was happening to her. Detective Fonseca met us at 8 a.m. in a conference room at Seattle PD headquarters, a practical space with whiteboards and evidence boards covering the walls. She was a woman in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled back severely and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen too much to tolerate any nonsense. Devin arrived minutes after we did, carrying a folder thick with documentation he'd compiled overnight. Detective Fonseca listened to our entire account without interrupting, taking notes in a small spiral notebook, her expression neutral. When we finished, she pulled up Harmony's photo from the driver's license information Tristan had provided and studied it for a long moment. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said finally. "Your sister fits the profile of targets we've been seeing in a trafficking operation that's been active in Seattle for about 8 months. Professional women traveling alone, staying at mid-range hotels near the airport, attending conferences where they're distracted and have predictable schedules. We've had 6 cases in the past year where women matching this description disappeared during business trips and later turned up in trafficking situations in other states. 4 of them we recovered, 2 are still missing." Her words hit me physically, making my chest tight. The good news is that if your sister was able to make that video call and signal you, she's likely still in a local holding facility rather than having been moved out of state yet. Detective Fonseca explained that trafficking operations typically held victims locally for 72 hours to break down their resistance through intimidation, isolation, and sometimes violence, before moving them into the broader network where they'd be much harder to trace. The video call setup was standard procedure, designed to create a false record of the victim being safe and voluntary in their activities, making it harder for family members to convince police that something was wrong. "The fact that your sister had the presence of mind to use a prearranged danger signal is extremely significant," Fonseca said. "Most victims are too traumatized or scared to think strategically in those situations. It tells me your sister is mentally strong and actively trying to help us find her." She pulled up a map on the conference room's large monitor showing an area of industrial Seattle south of downtown, near the Duwamish River. "This is where we've recovered 3 of the 4 victims from previous cases. There's a concentration of warehouses and commercial storage facilities that the organization seems to prefer, probably because they're isolated enough to avoid attention, but accessible enough to move victims quickly when needed." Devin spread out his overnight documentation showing the 12 locations he'd identified, and Fonseca immediately zeroed in on 3 of them that matched her known parameters. Fonseca made several phone calls, and within 30 minutes we were joined by 2 more detectives and an FBI agent named Carl Brennan, who specialized in human trafficking investigations. Agent Brennan explained that the FBI had been tracking a trafficking network operating across Washington, Oregon, and California for the past 2 years, but they'd struggled to identify the organization's leadership or primary operating locations. "We've recovered 17 victims during that time, but each one was taken from a different location and held in different temporary facilities. The organization is sophisticated, using burner phones and encrypted communications, moving victims constantly to avoid patterns." He pulled up photos on a laptop showing the aftermath of 3 warehouse raids where they'd found evidence of victims being held, but the victims themselves had already been moved. "If we move too quickly and raid the wrong location, or if they get warning we're coming, they'll scatter and your sister will be in the wind. We need to be absolutely certain we've identified the right facility before we act." The calculated risk assessment made sense professionally but felt agonizing personally because every hour of delay was another hour Harmony was trapped and terrified. Devin suggested we focus on the 3 warehouse locations that matched both his overnight reconnaissance and Detective Fonseca's known parameters. He'd taken telephoto photographs of each building showing external characteristics, surrounding businesses, vehicle access points. Agent Brennan studied them carefully, cross-referencing with FBI databases of known trafficking locations. One of the warehouses stood out immediately, a 2-story concrete structure with high windows, heavy security doors, and a loading dock that would allow vehicles to enter and exit without being visible from the street. The building's registered owner was a shell corporation with ties to other businesses the FBI had been investigating for money laundering and labor trafficking. "This is our best lead," Brennan said, tapping the photo. "We've had this location on our watch list for 3 months, but haven't had probable cause for a warrant. If your sister is there and we can confirm it somehow, we can move fast." Fonseca asked if there was any way to verify Harmony's presence without alerting the traffickers, and Devin suggested thermal imaging surveillance that could show how many people were inside the building and where they were located. Brennan made a call to request the equipment, telling us it would take about 2 hours to get the surveillance team in position. Those 2 hours were the longest of my life. We stayed in the conference room at Seattle PD while Brennan coordinated with his team, Fonseca prepared warrant applications, and Tristan made calls to a victim services organization to arrange support for Harmony once we found her. I sat at the conference table feeling useless, scrolling through old photos of Harmony on my phone, torturing myself with memories of the last time I'd seen her in person. She'd come to Portland for my birthday 3 weeks ago, and we'd gone to brunch at our favorite restaurant where she'd told me about her latest sales success and her plans to apply for a promotion. She'd been happy, confident, excited about her future. I'd hugged her goodbye at the airport, never imagining it might be the last time I'd see her free and safe. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom's sister, our Aunt Diane, asking if I'd heard from Harmony because she'd tried to call her about Thanksgiving plans and couldn't reach her. I didn't know how to respond without alarming her or revealing what was happening, so I sent back a vague message saying Harmony was at a conference and probably just busy. The lie made me feel sick, but Tristan had advised keeping the situation contained to immediate family and law enforcement until we knew more. At 11:30 a.m., Agent Brennan's phone rang and he answered it immediately, listening intently before hanging up and pulling the surveillance photos up on the conference room monitor. The thermal imaging showed 9 heat signatures inside the warehouse, concentrated on the building's second floor. 3 signatures were mobile and moving around the space in patterns consistent with guards or traffickers monitoring victims. 6 signatures were stationary and clustered together in what appeared to be a locked room or holding area. "This is a live trafficking operation," Brennan said grimly. "The victim count and setup match our previous intelligence about how this network operates." Fonseca was already on her phone getting authorization for the warrant, and within 20 minutes we had legal approval to raid the warehouse. The tactical plan came together with frightening speed. Seattle PD SWAT team would breach the building through 3 entry points simultaneously. FBI agents would provide support and evidence collection. Paramedics would stand by to provide immediate medical attention to any victims found. Brennan made it clear that Tristan and I would not be going anywhere near the warehouse during the actual raid, that we'd wait at a staging area 2 blocks away where we'd be updated in real time and where Harmony would be brought if she was among the victims found. The restriction was frustrating, but I understood the reasoning. We'd be liabilities in a tactical situation, and our presence could compromise the operation. The staging area was a parking lot behind a commercial building where police vehicles assembled out of sight of the target warehouse. Tristan and I sat in Detective Fonseca's unmarked car with the radio tuned to the tactical channel, listening to terse communications between team members as they moved into position. Devin had been allowed to accompany the FBI team as a consultant, and I could hear his voice occasionally checking in with updates. The SWAT commander counted down from 10, and then all 3 entry teams breached simultaneously. I heard the explosive charges blowing the doors, shouting voices commanding suspects to get on the ground, and then the sound of movement and confusion as the teams cleared the building. 3 suspects were taken into custody within the first 2 minutes, all of them found on the ground floor attempting to flee through a back exit. The second floor required more careful clearing because of the locked room where the thermal imaging had shown the stationary signatures. The SWAT team forced the door, and I heard a female voice over the radio saying, 6 victims confirmed, 4 female, 2 male, all appear to be alive, requesting immediate medical. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto my phone. Tristan reached over and gripped my shoulder hard, his own face pale with tension. Detective Fonseca's radio crackled with Devin's voice asking for descriptions of the female victims. The SWAT commander read off rough details. Asian female, approximately 30 years old, Latina female, approximately 25, white female, approximately 25 with brown hair, and white female, approximately 35 with blonde hair. None of those matched Harmony's description. I felt my stomach drop sickeningly, the brief hope that we'd found her evaporating. Devin's voice came back asking about distinguishing marks, and after a pause, the commander confirmed that the brunette white female had a small tattoo on her right ankle. Butterfly. Harmony. They'd found her. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing through the flood of relief that made me dizzy. Tristan was saying something, but I couldn't hear him over the roaring in my ears. Detective Fonseca turned in her seat and told me firmly that Harmony was alive and being brought out, that paramedics were evaluating her, that I'd be able to see her very soon. I nodded mutely, tears streaming down my face as the reality finally broke through the shock. The next 10 minutes passed in a blur of radio chatter and vehicle movement as ambulances were brought to the warehouse and victims were loaded for transport to Harborview Medical Center. Devin called Fonseca directly to confirm that Harmony was conscious and able to speak, that she'd asked for her family immediately upon being found, that she appeared to have been physically restrained but not seriously injured. We followed the ambulance convoy to Harborview, where victims were being taken to a secure floor of the emergency department that specialized in trafficking cases. Hospital security met us at the entrance and verified our identities before allowing us upstairs, where a victim services coordinator named Lakeisha Williams explained what to expect. "Your sister is experiencing significant trauma and shock," Lakeisha said gently. She may not be able to talk coherently right away, and she may have emotional reactions that seem disproportionate or unexpected. That's normal. Let her set the pace of interaction. Don't push for details about what happened unless she volunteers them. Your job right now is just to be present and help her feel safe. She led us to a private examination room where Harmony sat on a hospital bed wearing clean scrubs that the hospital had provided. Her face was bruised on the left side, her wrists had visible marks from restraints, and her hair was tangled and matted. But when she saw us, her expression crumpled and she started sobbing, reaching out with shaking hands. I went to her immediately, wrapping my arms around her carefully while she cried into my shoulder. Tristan stood on her other side with his hand on her back, and we stayed there for several minutes just holding her while she cried out the terror and relief of the past 48 hours. When Harmony could finally speak, her voice was hoarse and broken. "I knew you'd see it," she said. "I knew you'd remember the signal. They were watching me the whole time during that call, telling me exactly what to say, but I kept thinking about Dad and how he made us practice. I knew if I could just get that gesture in, you'd understand." She described how she'd been grabbed in the hotel parking garage while loading luggage into a rental car, two men forcing her into a van before she could scream or fight back. They'd taken her phone immediately, stripped her of identification and credit cards, and driven her to the warehouse where she'd been locked in a room with 5 other people in similar situations. The traffickers had told them all that they'd been selected for work opportunities that would pay their debts or fund their families, but it was clear to Harmony immediately that this was captivity, not employment. They'd been given minimal food and water, forbidden from speaking to each other, and told that resistance would result in punishment. The video call had been set up after Harmony had been there for about 24 hours, part of what the traffickers called welfare checks, designed to prevent immediate missing person reports from family. They'd given her a script to follow, told her to smile and act normal, and monitored her from off-camera with threats of violence if she deviated from their instructions. Harmony said she'd decided during the first few hours of captivity that she needed to signal for help if she got any opportunity to communicate with family, and she'd spent her time mentally rehearsing the danger gesture Dad had taught us. When they'd set up the video call, she'd deliberately incorporated the signal into natural movements, touching her hair and face in ways that looked casual but contained our coded message. "I made it 3 times during that call," she said. "I was terrified you wouldn't see it, or you'd think I was just nervous or it was coincidence. But I remembered Dad saying that the signal only works if both sides remember the training, and I was betting everything on you remembering." I told her we'd caught it the first time, that we'd mobilized within minutes, that we'd never stopped looking for her. She gripped my hand hard enough to hurt and said, "Dad knew. He always said these systems exist for the one time you actually need them, and this was that time." We stayed with Harmony through 5 hours of medical examinations, police interviews, and victim services consultations. Detective Fonseca took her full statement about the kidnapping and captivity, documenting every detail for the criminal prosecution. Agent Brennan interviewed her about the warehouse location and the other victims, trying to gather intelligence that would help dismantle the broader trafficking network. The 3 men arrested at the warehouse were charged with kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy, facing federal charges that carried potential sentences of 25 years to life. Agent Brennan explained that the FBI had been surveilling the organization for months, but had lacked the probable cause and evidence needed for warrants until Harmony's case gave them the opening. "Your sister's danger signal and your quick response made this entire operation possible," he told us. "Without that, we'd still be building our case while more victims were being taken." The warehouse raid had recovered evidence linking the Seattle operation to trafficking networks in 3 other states, including communications about product acquisition and inventory management that made clear this was organized crime on a significant scale. The FBI was coordinating with law enforcement in Oregon, California, and Nevada to execute simultaneous raids on related facilities. Over the next week, they recovered 23 additional victims from connected operations, dismantling a trafficking network that had been operating for at least 3 years. The case made national news, with media coverage focusing on the sophisticated criminal organization and the multi-state law enforcement response. Harmony's identity was protected as a victim, but the story of the hand signal that had triggered the investigation leaked to reporters somehow, and suddenly we were getting interview requests from news outlets wanting to know about Dad's security training and the signal system he'd taught us. Tristan and I discussed it with Harmony and decided to do one carefully controlled interview with a national news program, using it as an opportunity to teach other families about the importance of prearranged danger signals. Harmony was still recovering and didn't participate in the interview, but Tristan and I explained Dad's philosophy about giving children tools to protect themselves, described the specific signal system we'd been taught, and emphasized that the training had saved Harmony's life when traditional safety measures failed. The response was overwhelming. Parents reached out asking for details about how to implement similar systems with their own families. Self-defense instructors contacted us wanting to incorporate danger signals into their curriculum. Victims' advocacy organizations asked permission to use our story in their training materials. I compiled everything into a guide that explained the basic principles. Signals needed to be specific and unusual enough to be clearly intentional, but subtle enough to be executed without alerting captors. They needed to be practiced regularly until they became automatic. And most importantly, Families needed to establish clear protocols for what to do when someone gave the danger signal, because recognition was useless without immediate action. Harmony moved back to Portland after being released from the hospital, unable to handle being in Seattle where the trauma had occurred. She moved into my spare bedroom temporarily while we worked through the aftermath together. She started therapy with a specialist in trauma recovery who helped her process what had happened and develop coping strategies for the PTSD symptoms that emerged. Panic attacks in parking garages, hypervigilance around strangers, nightmares about being restrained. Tristan coordinated with the Victims Services Organization to ensure Harmony had access to all available resources and support. We attended family therapy sessions together, learning how to support Harmony's recovery without being overprotective or treating her as fragile. One of the hardest aspects was Harmony's guilt about the other victims who'd been in that warehouse with her, 5 people who'd experienced the same terror she had, but whose families hadn't had the tools or training to recognize when something was wrong. We tracked their cases as the investigation progressed, learning that 2 of them had been missing for over a month before being recovered, their families having filed missing person reports that hadn't generated the urgent response Harmony's danger signal had triggered. Harmony struggled with survivor's guilt, feeling that she'd been rescued because of advantages the other victims didn't have, that our father's training had been a privilege not everyone possessed. That guilt drove Harmony to become an advocate for victims' rights and trafficking prevention. She started speaking at high schools and colleges about her experience, teaching students about the reality of human trafficking and how to protect themselves when traveling alone. She worked with victims' services organizations to develop safety protocols for business travelers, partnering with hotel chains to implement training for staff on recognizing signs of trafficking. She testified before Congress about the need for increased funding for trafficking investigations and victim recovery programs. And she helped establish a nonprofit organization that provided free self-defense and safety training to women, including instruction on danger signals and emergency response protocols. The organization was called Safe Signal Foundation, named after the hand gesture that had saved her life, and its mission was to ensure that other families had access to the same protective tools Dad had given us. Tristan served as the foundation's legal counsel pro bono, drafting policies and procedures, negotiating partnerships with law enforcement agencies, ensuring the organization operated ethically and effectively. I became the executive director, managing day-to-day operations and program development, using my background in nonprofit management to build something sustainable and impactful. The 3 traffickers arrested at the warehouse were convicted on all charges after a trial that lasted 2 weeks. Harmony testified as the prosecution's primary witness, describing in detail how she'd been kidnapped, how she'd been held captive, how the traffickers had controlled and intimidated their victims. Her testimony was devastating and powerful, and several jurors were visibly emotional as she described using the danger signal her father had taught her as a child. The defense attorneys tried to discredit her, suggesting she'd willingly gone with the traffickers and only claimed kidnapping after the relationship soured, but the physical evidence contradicted that narrative completely. The restraint marks on her wrists, the bruising, the medical documentation, and the testimony of other victims established clearly that this had been captivity, not consent. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The lead trafficker, a man named Dominic Ferraro who'd orchestrated the entire Seattle operation, received a sentence of 45 years in federal prison. His 2 associates received 30 and 25 years respectively. At sentencing, the judge noted that the case had exposed a trafficking network of unprecedented scope and sophistication, and that harsh sentences were necessary to deter others from believing this criminal enterprise could operate without consequences. Agent Brennan told us that the Seattle warehouse raid and subsequent investigation had led to 87 total arrests across 4 states, the recovery of 49 victims, and the dismantling of a trafficking operation that had been generating an estimated $15 million annually in illegal revenue. The scope of it was sickening, the realization that Harmony had been one victim among dozens being cycled through this industrial exploitation system. But it also meant that recognizing her danger signal had triggered the cascade that freed all those other people, that Dad's insistence on safety protocols had multiplied far beyond just protecting his own children. Harmony said that knowledge helped her process the trauma, feeling that her experience had meaning beyond just her own survival, that other victims had been saved because she'd been able to signal for help. She visited the other 5 victims who'd been in that warehouse with her, connecting with them through the shared bond of surviving something horrific together. 3 of them joined Safe Signal Foundation as advisors, helping design training programs from the victim perspective, ensuring the content reflected actual experiences rather than theoretical scenarios. One of them, a woman named Jasmine Okafor, who'd been held for 6 weeks before the raid, became the foundation's training director, traveling nationally to teach danger signal systems to schools and community organizations. 5 years after Harmony's kidnapping, Safe Signal Foundation had trained over 200,000 people in danger recognition and response protocols. We'd partnered with 43 law enforcement agencies across 12 states to implement improved missing person response procedures that prioritized family reports of danger signals. We'd successfully lobbied for legislation in Washington and Oregon requiring human trafficking awareness training in high schools. And we'd heard from 127 families who'd used danger signals taught through our programs to identify when a family member was in danger, leading to interventions that prevented or interrupted trafficking situations. Each one of those stories validated Dad's belief that preparing children to protect themselves wasn't paranoia, but necessary precaution in a world where dangers existed, whether we acknowledged them or not. Harmony kept a wall in our office dedicated to photos and stories sent by people who'd been helped by the training, visual proof that one person's survival could ripple outward to protect countless others. She said it reminded her on difficult days why she'd chosen to speak publicly about the worst experience of her life, why she relived the trauma repeatedly in testimony and interviews and training sessions. Because silence protected predators while information protected potential victims, and she refused to let shame or fear prevent her from arming other people with the tools they needed to survive. The hand gesture Dad taught us remained central to our family identity. Harmony's children, born 6 and 8 years after her kidnapping, learned the danger signal as toddlers, practicing it the same way Dad had made us practice. Tristan's kids knew it. I taught it to every student in my self-defense classes. And through Safe Signal Foundation, it spread to thousands of other families who adapted it for their own needs, modifying the specific gesture but maintaining the core principle. Establish clear, prearranged danger signals and practice them until they're instinctive. The trafficking network that had targeted Harmony was dismantled completely, its leadership imprisoned and its infrastructure destroyed. But we all knew other networks still operated, that traffickers adapted and evolved and found new methods. The work of preventing trafficking and protecting potential victims was ongoing and perpetual, requiring constant vigilance and education. Safe Signal Foundation became a national leader in that work, our origin story lending credibility and urgency to our message. Harmony was invited to speak at the FBI National Academy, at international conferences on human trafficking, at United Nations sessions about victim protection. She used every platform to emphasize the same point. Victims often know they're in danger before anyone else does, and they need tools to communicate that danger when traditional methods are blocked. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.